Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Wendy K of Wendy K Consulting, and today we are covering part 4 of my micro-learning series of hacking remote leadership. And today we're going to be covering how to create a new normal for your team. So this session is all about creating a new normal for your team, especially if you and your team have not had experience of going remote before, or this is just completely new, or you're trying to create some sense of what this could look like for the long term. Now, remember, just because this is titled Creating a New Norm, it doesn't mean that this is all on you. In fact, I would highly encourage you to talk to your teams and make sure they feel included and that their voices are heard in how you are defining this new normal. And when I talk about creating a new normal, really there's two things that we're going to cover. One is about the structure and norms of what remote work looks like between you and your team, and then amongst each other, the team dynamics. And then also the technology. Technology and tools are a huge part of making remote work a success. So this is definitely an area that we should touch on. All right, let's start with creating structure and norms. And there's really 3 parts here that we're going to be talking about. One is setting communication cadence and norms, level setting accountability, and then creating transparency and inclusion. These are the 3 major components of structure and norms that could really help make remote work effective and also engaging for everyone. So let's start with creating a communication cadence and norms. So one of the things that you are going to see is that people may not be getting together as much, and that could be normal and that could be expected, especially if you are used to seeing each other every day. So how often do you need to get together and meet? What should be the cadence of your team meetings, of your one-on-ones, and what are the tools you're going to use for those meetings and to facilitate them? Some of these questions may seem like they get into the weeds, but trust me, if you don't have these small details figured out, or your team doesn't have some input on how these details should look like, when it gets to those meetings, when you're trying to set a cadence for these meetings, things could easily start to fall apart if you don't have some sense of consistency. And when it comes to tools, it's not just about recognizing the tools you have, but it's also about getting agreement within your team on how you're going to use them. I have this quick example. So I used to work for this really large company, and we had all kinds of tools at our team's disposal, which was great. We had Skype, where we could quickly type chat with each other. Of course, we had email, and everyone had access to each other's cell phone numbers, so we could easily call each other up, text each other, and then we also had a different system where we could virtually call each other. Now, it was awesome that we had the support from the company to leverage these tools to talk to each other. At the same time, it got really confusing on which tool was the one that we were supposed to use. For example, if I had an urgent request, I may just Skype somebody, but maybe the person receiving that message may think of that as something much more casual, and their sense of urgency is maybe in the form of me picking up the phone and calling them, but that's maybe not my version of urgency. So it's really important for the team to level set beforehand what tools to use for what. When it comes to accountability, this is probably one of the stickiest things for leaders, and I hear this all the time. If I don't see you, how do I know that you're working? And we talked about this before. As a leader, you need to place that trust on your team that they are getting the work done. And part of that is setting new expectations of what that looks like. And of course, with that, you need to create some structure of how accountability can be measured, how accountability can be set with your team. And again, this is not about micromanaging, but it's you as a leader being clear with your expectations and creating a plan of how you want to follow up with each other on work that gets done. How do you want to check in with progress? And it has to be something that works for both you and your employee. Now, one example of accountability that I think is maybe not always obvious, but I guarantee it's something that's on everyone's mind, is meetings. How are we going to do meetings in a remote setting when meetings are not necessarily enjoyable in person? And I think that's a space where accountability is so important. So as a leader, you need to really create a strict structure of what meetings look like. That means you need to show up with an agenda, you need to have someone to facilitate it, and you need to walk away with some clear goals. When you're in person, those things matter as well, and I think are just as relevant. However, when you are in a remote setting, not having clear agenda will really get people to disengage and start browsing around on the internet or multitask really quickly. So if you want to be able to get things done and be productive with your meetings, you need to be accountable as a leader on how you hold these meetings. And the last but not least of defining good structure and norms is creating transparency and inclusion. And I've heard stories from people who've said that nothing makes them feel excluded faster than if they feel like they don't know everything that maybe somebody else on the team knows. And there's an accountability on you as a leader to create this transparency and inclusion. So transparency really is in the foundation of a structure of remote work. And it's imperative that you as a leader, you not only set the expectation of how information flows and gets shared, but you model it and reinforce it. This means that discussions on things that impact everyone should be done in a group setting. That includes decision making and communicating decisions made. This goes without saying that offline discussions and decisions that impact the team or would be relevant for people to know shouldn't be shared selectively. For example, you may have seen this in real life meeting where something gets discussed and people walk away with a decision that was made collectively or an action item, and everyone walks away thinking they're on the same page. And then you have one or two people who then get together for a meeting that happens after a meeting, and then they talk about a different process or a different decision or share different information that wasn't talked about in that original meeting. And now all of a sudden you have a subset of that group who now knows something else and might be going a different direction. When you as a leader and you hold a lot of information and you're selectively sharing with people, even if it's not intentional, it's going to be a slippery slope of really disengaging people and making them feel like they're excluded. And it will easily create the sense that you have a favorite or that you have somebody that you have a strong positive bias for because they're the only person that apparently now knows something that other people. Why having a good structure for how communication happens, the tools for communication, how decision making shared, and how decisions and information flows through the team will help create a sense of inclusion. And like I said, when it comes to remote work, loneliness is a feeling, but social isolation is a structural problem. And you don't want people to feel isolated or excluded from the team. All right, folks. I actually broke up part 4 into 2 because I did promise you that each video will be 10 minutes or shorter. So stay tuned for part 4B, where we will talk about technology and tools as part of creating this new normal for your team. Stay tuned.